today's webinar is about the 4 calls within the new work program of Horizon Europe that are targeting Chinese participation. And we are very lucky in the sense that we have with us great expertise. We have people from the EU delegation and DTRDT to explain a little bit about the context of these calls. And we will also have a Q&A on that. And this is going to be the focus. But we decided that we would start half an hour earlier with more basic question, which is, what is Horizon Europe, right? And how does it work? And in particular, how does these sort of collaborative projects with Horizon Europe work? Because this is sort of the basic for everything else. And we noticed when we were looking at our webinar agenda that we didn't really go into any of these things. And I see this happen all the time. We are so in the weeds to talk about all the details about these calls that maybe some of the most basic things are not necessarily communicated so well. So this is just like an optional little thing for those of you that are joining us a little bit earlier today. And thanks all of you for coming to join this sort of pre-event session. But I just wanted to also use the opportunity and introduce EURAXESS China. We have already, I've already introduced the team, the 3 of us, Anna, Vanessa, and me. We have an office in Beijing where we've been since 2009. So this is what, the 14th year of EURAXESS in China. And really quickly to explain in a short way what EURAXESS China is that we are here to animate a network to support researchers that want to stay connected between China and the European research area. So there are basically 2 different groups of people that we are focusing on. It would be sort of Chinese researchers here in China that are want to work in Europe or with Europe or inside a European project like the projects we're talking about today, etc. Or it could be European researchers that are based in China are coming to work inside the Chinese research system. These are sort of the 2 groups of people that we work with. And EURAXESS is an initiative of DTRDT of the European Commission. And we are very lucky today that we will have somebody from the DTRDT to join us. So it's good to have like the real authority on some of these things to talk about these calls on the webinar itself. So these are our colleagues in Brussels, but our office is here in Beijing, basically. But in general, EURAXESS is bigger than only us in the China hub. We consist of basically 3 parts, which is our service centers, which are centered all around Europe. So if you are a non-European researcher or an institution or anything like that, and you're planning to go to a member state of the European Union or any other country associated with the European research area, you can basically count on that no matter where you'll go, there's a EURAXESS center. For example, in Germany, there's about 70 of them. All over Europe, we have more than 600. And these centers are there to make some of the practical matters of being a mobile researcher more easy. It's not there to solve the scientific questions, that is your job, but it's there to maybe facilitate some of the more practical problems of mobility when you're a researcher. So for example, let's say how to get funding in the country or how to take care of visa issues or some things like this, like really practical matters. On top of that, we also have our EURAXESS web portal, which includes the biggest job database in the world for researcher with tens of thousands of research opportunities. And we actually tried to repost that. My colleague Vanessa helps us to run a WeChat channel where we repost some selected opportunities from our job portal. But it's a great place to find a research opportunity. But also, if you're an institution, it's a great place to find researchers, right? So that is good. And on top of that, there's also all kinds of practical information about funding and other things. And each European country has their own EURAXESS portal with all the information that you need to know if you want to be working with that country, etc. So it's a really great resource. And then there's the part that we are part of, which is the EURAXESS Worldwide. And in EURAXESS Worldwide, what we try to do is that we try to connect places outside of Europe with the European research area. So we have offices all over the world, including like Brazil, for example, and Mexico, We have the United States and India and Japan and South Korea and a lot of places. There's a new office now, for example, in Africa that just got opened last year. So there are Euraccess offices all over the world. And we try to connect those local research communities with the European research community in different ways. So the things that we do include things like share information. So we do that through all kinds of different tools that we have available, social media, our webinars, etc. We also have a really strong mandate to help out with networking. So we believe that we need to be connecting researchers around the world to achieve great scientific results. And that means that we try to help with partnering and establishing of networks, in our case, between European and Chinese researchers. So maybe today this could also be considered one of the things that we might want to think about. Hopefully, we have with us today Chinese institutions that are interested in working with European institutions on these calls that we're going to be talking about. We do webinars like the one we're doing right now, but also other workshops and trainings on how to get funding, but also different things like science, communication, and how to get published, and also just like more fun things and different things. And then we also do all kinds of events and activities. Hopefully this year, with sort of the COVID restrictions changing, we might be able to do more physical events, but normally we would try to do networking events where researchers can meet and so on. This is all things that we do here at Euraccess. And that takes me to basically the thing that we are trying to represent here, which is the European Research Area. And European Research Area includes all the member states of the European Union, but also many different associated countries. So we could be talking about places like Austria or whatever, not the UK actually, I'm sorry, that's an old one. But it could also be things like associated countries, like let's say Norway or Switzerland or something like that. And then there are the system of the European Union, which we have our own funding framework, which is called the Horizon Europe, that is there to sort of tie this all together into one research area, creating calls and research infrastructure that allows these countries to work together more effectively, basically. And that includes Horizon Europe, that has sort of two main sort of different ways that you could interact with, I would say. There is the way of doing it as an individual, and there's also the way to do it through an institution, let's say. As an individual, you could work with Horizon Europe through funding schemes like the Marie Curie, which have like individual fellowships, etc., or the European Research Council that have really, really prestigious grants available for individual researchers. But you could also be doing it through like big institutional collaboration, like things like the Research and Innovation Staff Exchange, but also big Horizon projects. And these are some of the things that we will be talking about here today, are these sort of big scale Horizon collaborative projects. And it could be co-funded, for example. So Horizon Europe, which is the framework program for research and innovation between 2021, starting last year until 2027, is almost 100 billion euro research funding program, which makes it one of the biggest research funding source in the whole world, and includes the 27 member states of the European Union and the associated countries to Horizon, which are also plenty. And the whole goal of Horizon Europe is to strengthen the EU scientific and technological basis and the European research area, but also, to boost the European innovation capacity, competitiveness, and to create sort of socioeconomic models and values that we try to deliver through the Horizon Europe. And they try to be visionary. Horizon Europe is trying to tackle, to be instrumental in tackling climate change. This is a huge part of the budget, and the budget is really large. And you can see today, the calls that we're talking about will be connected to this. And they're here to help to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals and to boost the European Union's competitiveness and growth. And there are major missions in Horizon Europe, which is sort of a new element to Horizon. And a lot of the different calls and clusters of the Horizon Europe sort of research funding is connected to some of these big missions. These missions include soil, health, and food. There's the mission on cancer, mission on climate neutral and smart cities, adapting to climate change. And then there's healthy oceans and waters. These are the big missions. And you'll see that the calls that we're discussing are obviously really clearly connected to this mission. And why do they have this mission? Because sometimes it could be smart to have a mission that cuts through more than one thematic area, right? It's not necessarily always in the same scientific area, but it could be serving the same sort of overarching goal. And the way that this is structured is basically through different pillars. And we don't think it's necessary to talk too much about sort of the pillars because this is very technical, except for I want to sort of point you towards the fact that we have something called Pillar 1 and Pillar 2. Pillar 1 is on excellent science, and it's very bottom up. The researcher comes up with idea, and the goal is to just do some excellent science, and is often interacting between the European Union and individuals, maybe through some institutions, like through the European Research Council grants or the Marie Skłodowska-Curie Actions fellowships, etc. But the things that we're going to be talking about today is Pillar 2, which is on global challenges and European industrial competitiveness. And it's basically big collaborative projects with a lot of institutions working together on these huge grants, millions of euros each. And they're more top-down in the sense that the call themes and focus and priorities is defined ahead of time and put in this sort of a work program where they say, we want to be working on this over the next few years, telling people what are the calls and what are the dates and the timing of it, etc. And then it's up to the researchers and the institutions to sort of group together into big groups of applicant consortiums that then will compete for these money to do exactly this sort of research job. So it's a little bit different. It's like the other way to do sort of research. And the calls that we are talking about today fall under Pillar 2, and they are basically already predefined sort of targets that like requires you to sort of try to achieve what is said in that call, right? They are all under different clusters. There are a cluster in health, there's a cluster in culture and creativity, civil security, digital industry and space. There's a cluster number 5 on climate, energy, and mobility, and we'll be talking about calls from there. And there's also one on food, bioeconomy, natural resources, agriculture, and environment. And this is also a cluster that we'll be discussing today. I'm not going to spend a lot of energy on the Pillar 1. I just want to point your attention a little bit to the fact that we have something called the European Research Council that has also a huge budget. You can basically, if you have a great idea that you like to be funded, this is one of the most prestigious funding mechanisms that exist in the world today, where you could actually get funded, and the only requirement is just that the idea needs to be excellent, and you need to show that you're able to push boundaries of science. And in that case, we're looking at individuals that are applying for this grant in cooperation with an institution. So it's a little bit different from the other calls that we are going to be discussing now. But these are also very prestigious, and they're also really significant. A single principal investigator could get between 1.5 to 2.5 million, I think, is the maximum euros. So this is a lot of money also. And China has also a pretty good track record of getting researchers funded through the European Research Council. We can see that in 2020, there were 50 researchers, 50 principal investigators that had gotten the starting or consolidated grant, for example, which is pretty good. It's about 8% of the ERC grants. Then there's also the Marie Skłodowska-Curie Actions. This is also something you could think about. If you are an individual researcher and you have a research idea that you want to fill out, this is more like a training scheme, right? It has the goal of mobility, trying to get researchers to go to different places and to train them and advance their career. And more than 50,000 researchers have been funded through these actions since they started. So this is also a huge funding scheme that covers all different areas of research. A noteworthy scheme there would be the postdoctoral fellowships. This is something that we in EURAccess do special training workshops every year, at least twice. So if this is something you're interested in, like as an individual postdoctoral fellow and so on, postdoctoral researcher, want to get this kind of fellowship, you can like learn about that. And we also have a lot of Chinese researchers that have been successful with this. So please follow us if you're interested in that. It includes finding a hosting institution in Europe. This is also something that we try to help people out with. And in general, no matter what sort of funding you're going for and whatever, one of the first things that you always need to be considering is who you're going to be working with, because it always requires at least a hosting institution that is European. And in the case of these calls that we're talking about today, they require that you're working with at least 3 institutions in Europe, and normally a lot more, from 3 different countries. So you need to start thinking about who am I going to work with, and so how do you find partners, etc. These are things that we in EURAccess also try to support with as much as we can. So let's talk about the pillar 2. These are on the global challenges, and this is the pillar. These are the kind of calls that we are going to be discussing in a webinar that starts at 5 o'clock. The way it works, like I said, is that we need to have at least 3 institutions from 3 different member states of the European Union or an associated country of Horizon. So we're talking about 3 like this. And honestly, I will take some examples later. Normally, we have to have more institutions. There's like very common, there's like 10 or 15 or maybe more, 20 institutions. You need to try to create a group of institutions that is competitive and letting people to achieve what the call sets out, and having more on board might help out with that. Of course, the quality is number 1. But in addition to at least 3 from 3 different countries, you could have many others from different European countries, or also for something like a third country. It could be 1 or more institutions from a Chinese institution, for example. This is very possible. And so it's normally open to the world with some caveats. There's some there could be something in the call that like restricts that, but normally it would be open for places outside of Europe to participate in these consortiums, take part in that research. So I think it's really smart, if you want to learn more about this, to go somewhere like the Cordis database, which is something that we can find on the Europa portal, which is the European Union's website, where you can see every single project that has been funded by Horizon 2020 and Horizon Europe so far. And nowhere there you can search through thematic areas and different types of research, and you can see the sort of examples of projects that have been very successful. And this could be a good idea just to wrap your head around what these kind of projects look like. It's a good starting point. But going through Horizon 2020 projects that are already sort of finished, we could, for example, look at the first one here. It was called Gold Jelly, which is on a gelatinous solutions to plastic pollution. So it's not important what the research was about, but you can see that it included 15 institutions. There were 6 from European Union member states, and there were 2 from European Union, like associated countries. But there was also 1 non-European institution there. And that was the Chinese Academy of Sciences Institute of Oceanology. So you can see in this case how they structured this call, like this group. The second call that I pulled out, this is just at a random. It's called Aquaspace Ecosystem Approach to Making Space for Aquaculture. This was even more. They had 20 participants, and they came from 9 different EU countries. And there was also 3 institutions from a third country, including 1 from China, which was the Chinese Academy of Fisheries Sciences. So you can see here, like, oh, there's like a lot of different institutions and from a lot of different countries. That's normally how it is. And they're normally coordinated in a European institution. There's like 1 institution that coordinates the whole research project. In the first case here was, for example, an institution in Denmark. Today, we'll be talking about these calls in these 2 different clusters. So I'm not going to spend a lot of energy on it right now, but we have calls in cluster 5 on climate, energy, and mobility, and calls from cluster 6 on food, bioeconomy, natural resources, agriculture, and environment. And we just had a new work program open in December on this. And there were 183 calls in the first cluster that you can find in the funding database of the European Union online. And there are 203 calls in the second, in the cluster 6. And in each cluster, there are 2 calls targeting China, but both really big ones. And we'll be discussing these 4 calls today. But you can see there's also a lot of other calls. And they're also within these sort of clusters. So I mean, like if you want to look around, if there's other research calls, there could be possibility to get involved in some of the other calls, but they're just not necessarily targeting Chinese participation so much. But it doesn't mean that you cannot take a look. So if you are a Chinese institution, how do you participate as a third country participant? You basically have a little bit of a different status. A third country participant means that you're not from the European Union. They cannot get funded by the European Union directly. So this is like the main sort of rule. Unless they are developing country, like let's say some African country or whatever, they might be able to get money to fund their part of the research. But as a general rule, countries like the United States or China do not get funded, but they can still participate. It's not closed for them. It's absolutely open to them, but they need to fund themselves, right? So your institution, if you think this is amazing research that's going to going on, really great opportunity to participate in something that is really well funded in Europe, this is a good opportunity. But there's also maybe a possibility within your country to get some sort of co-funding from your own country. So this is a possibility. This is outside of the scope of what we can basically teach you, but we can sort of point you maybe to the right direction. There's some exceptions to this. There are funds sometimes that allows funding to third countries. This will be very clear in the call. And this time, I don't think there are any for China, for example. And there's also like some small percentage of calls that might say no third country allowed. But normally this is not something you need to worry about. It's not very common. There is a co-funding mechanism that did exist in Horizon 2020. And in Horizon Europe, there are also going to be some way to apply for co-funding from the Chinese government to participate in Horizon calls, in particular, these 4 that we're going to be talking about today. This co-funding mechanism, how it works, you need to talk to Ministry of Science and Technology in China to learn, but we can also try to sort of like point you to the right direction, how it is. And maybe also a colleague from the European delegation can explain what is the newest update on how that works exactly. But our goal today is not to explain exactly how the Ministry of Science and Technology in China does their co-funding. We're just telling you these are the 4 calls within the European Union that they are going to be co-funding. And then you can get more information how to do things on the Chinese side. But we will explain to you how these calls work in Europe. That is sort of the goal of the webinar that starts in 5 minutes. There are, from the European point of view, we have something called the EU-China Joint Roadmap for Research and Innovation. This is sort of a goal that people have been working on for many years. It's not quite finished yet, but it really illustrates really well sort of how we want to approach the cooperation between China and Europe in a lot of these things. So mostly they're based on something called framework conditions that EU and China both consider as essential when it comes to collaboration. You can kind of look into this a little bit to understand how sort of the policy thought is behind these sort of things. And they are still ongoing, like the discussions on this roadmap, but that sort of sets the outline and the ground for how that could be. So that brings me to the state of affairs as it is right now. We are in the position that we have 4 calls that have been decided in Europe and China that are going to sort of be flagship initiatives where China and Europe are going to be working together. There are going to be 2 within the food, agriculture, and biology, which is under this cluster 6. And there's also going to be 2 within climate change and biodiversity. And this is something that maybe our colleague at the European delegation could explain a little bit how they came about deciding these 4 calls. And then Anna and I will go into details about each of those calls later in the webinar. That's it for now. I hope that this gave some kind of background about how Horizon Europe works, and in particular, how the Pillar 2 funding is working, because you need to sort of understand the most basic things here. Mostly that we're talking about big funding that is going to a big consortium, groups of institutions that apply together, includes different institutions in different countries, can include somebody from China, and needs to be applied in Europe to get the funding there. And then for the funding that goes to the Chinese partners, needs to be something that either is self-funded or through a co-funding mechanism in China. This is really sort of like the basic things that I want you to understand. And the co-funding mechanism in China is managed by the Ministry of Science and Technology. We'd be very happy to share the contact with them, from them, so you can get more information about that. And also, if we know anything, we'll of course let you know.